Commander Zexthara had seen war across 17 star systems. His chitinous exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles, each mark telling a story of survival against impossible odds. The Kathrani warrior had fought the crystal beings of Proximus 7, survived the acid storms of the Helios campaign, and led the charge against the machine consciousness of Sector 9. Nothing in the galaxy had ever made him hesitate. Until today, the human vessel drifted silently through space, its hull blackened and twisted from some terrible conflict. The distress beacon had been broadcasting for 3 standard cycles, a simple plea for assistance that had reached the Kathrani battle cruiser Vengeance of Stars. Captain Mordetta had ordered an investigation, curious about these newcomers to galactic civilization. Scans show minimal life signs aboard, reported Navigator Yixtel from her console. Perhaps 12 to 15 survivors out of what appears to have been a crew of 300. Zexthara studied the human ship through the view screen. It was smaller than their own vessel, built with primitive materials by galactic standards. Yet something about its design spoke of brutal efficiency. The weapon ports were larger than necessary for a ship its size, and the armor plating showed signs of hasty battlefield repairs. What kind of conflict does this damage pattern suggest? Captain Mordetta asked, her violet eyes reflecting the light from the tactical display. Unknown, Zexthara admitted, and the words felt strange on his tongue. After 3 centuries of military service, he rarely encountered anything truly unfamiliar. The blast patterns are unlike anything in our databases. Some kind of directed energy weapon, but the focal points suggest multiple simultaneous strikes from different angles. Perhaps they encountered pirates, suggested Tactical Officer Nemthor. The Outer Rim has been troublesome lately. But Zexthara wasn't convinced. Pirates were opportunistic scavengers who preferred quick strikes and rapid escapes. This kind of damage spoke of sustained, coordinated assault. The human ship looked like it had fought a running battle across multiple systems. Sir, Navigator Yixtel called out, we're receiving a communication from the human vessel. Put it through, Captain Mordetta ordered. The main screen flickered, revealing a human male with pale skin and dark hair. His uniform was torn and stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Behind him, Zexthara could see other humans moving frantically through smoke-filled corridors. This is Captain James Richardson of the Earth Defense Force vessel Indomitable, the human said, his voice hoarse but steady. We appreciate your response to our distress call. Our ship has suffered catastrophic damage, and we have wounded aboard. I am Captain Mordetta of the Kathrani vessel Vengeance of Stars, the captain replied. What happened to your ship? The human's expression darkened. We encountered a Vexi hunting fleet 3 days ago. They attacked a human colony world. We tried to stop them. Zexthara felt his combat instincts sharpen. The Vexi were among the most feared predators in known space. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, with razor-sharp claws and an insatiable hunger for violence, they had carved out a brutal empire built on conquest and consumption. Their hunting fleets were legendary for their efficiency in stripping worlds of all life. A single human vessel engaged an entire Vexi hunting fleet? Captain Mordetta asked, disbelief evident in her voice. Not just engaged, Captain Richardson said quietly. We won. The bridge fell silent. Even the constant hum of the ship's systems seemed to pause. Zexthara felt something cold move through his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his first battle as a young warrior. That's impossible, Tactical Officer Nemthor whispered. A Vexi hunting fleet consists of at least 20 vessels, including 3 dreadnoughts. No single ship could. We have visual records, Captain Richardson interrupted. But I should warn you, they're disturbing. Captain Mordetta glanced at Zexthara, who nodded grimly. Show us, she commanded. The screen shifted to display external camera footage from the human ship. Zexthara watched as space filled with the distinctive angular shapes of Vexi warships. Their black hulls bristled with weapons, and their formation spoke of practiced coordination. At the center of the fleet, Three massive dreadnoughts moved like apex predators stalking wounded prey. The Vexai had just finished bombarding the colony of New Eden. Captain Richardson's voice provided narration over the footage. 2 million civilians dead. We arrived as they were beginning orbital harvesting operations. On screen, the human ship accelerated directly toward the Vexai fleet. It seemed suicidal, a tiny vessel charging into the maw of overwhelming force. But then something changed. The human ship began to fire. Zexthara had studied weapons systems his entire military career. He understood energy output ratings, projectile velocities, and shield penetration capabilities. What he watched now defied everything he thought he knew about space combat. The human weapons didn't just pierce Vexai shields, they obliterated them. Brilliant lances of coherent energy struck with surgical precision, each shot finding weak points in enemy armor with impossible accuracy. But it wasn't just the power of the weapons that made Zexthara's blood run cold. It was the pattern of the attack. "They're not trying to disable," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "What?" Captain Mordetta asked. "The targeting pattern," Zexthara explained, his eyes never leaving the screen. "They're not going for engines or weapon systems. They're targeting life support, command sections, crew quarters. They're trying to kill everyone aboard those ships." The Vexai fleet began to return fire, their own weapons blazing in the darkness. The human ship twisted through space with impossible grace, its movements defying the laws of physics that should have governed such a massive vessel. But even as it danced between enemy fire, its own guns never stopped. One by one, Vexai ships began to die. Not disabled, not damaged, dead. Each vessel that fell to human weapons died completely, catastrophically. Internal explosions tore through their hulls as life support systems failed and atmosphere vented into space. Zexthara could see escape pods launching from the dying ships, but the human vessel targeted those too, vaporizing them without hesitation. No prisoners Sextara Guisperth. The largest Vexai dreadnought, a vessel that could have easily destroyed most galactic navy fleets single-handedly, moved to engage the human ship directly. Its massive weapons began charging, energy readings climbing to levels that would have crippled the moon. The human ship accelerated straight toward it. "What are they doing?" "Navigato yixtil gaspit." The answer came seconds later. Just as the dreadnought fired its main cannon, the human ship vanished. Not destroyed, vanished. It reappeared behind the massive Vexai vessel, somehow having passed through solid matter. "Impossible, Captain Mordetta. No known technology can." Her words were cut off as the human ship opened fire at point-blank range. But these weren't energy weapons. These were projectiles of some kind, moving at significant fractions of light speed. They punched through the dreadnought's rear armor like it was made of paper, and Zexthara could see secondary explosions beginning to tear through the massive vessel's interior. But the humans weren't finished. As the dreadnought began to break apart, smaller objects launched from the human ship. They moved with purpose, attaching themselves to the dying vessel's hull. Moments later, brilliant white flashes erupted across the dreadnought's surface. "Fusion charges," Captain Richardson's voice explained calmly. "We want to make sure nothing survived." The dreadnought's death was spectacular. The fusion charges detonated simultaneously, turning 3 kilometers of Vexai engineering into expanding plasma. The explosion was so intense that it damaged 2 other enemy vessels caught in the blast radius. The remaining Vexai ships began to retreat. Zexthara had never seen the Vexai retreat from anything. They were apex predators, the nightmare that haunted civilized space. They conquered worlds, enslaved populations, and harvested entire species for food. They didn't run, but they ran from the humans. The human ship pursued them with relentless efficiency. One by one, it hunted down the fleeing vessels, destroying each with the same cold precision. There was no emotion in the attack, no rage or bloodlust, just methodical, calculated extermination. When the last Vexai ship died, the human vessel turned toward the devastated colony world below. The footage switched to an internal camera, showing Captain Richardson on his bridge. His expression was grim, but satisfied. "This is Captain Richardson to New Eden Colony survivors." His voice carried across the communication channels. "The Vexi fleet has been eliminated. We are beginning search and rescue operations." The footage ended, leaving the Kathrani bridge in stunned silence. "How many survivors did you rescue from the colony?" Captain Mordetta asked finally. Captain Richardson's expression hardened. "There were no survivors, Captain. The Vexi were thorough, but their fleet will never threaten another world." Zexthara felt something he had never experienced before in 3 centuries of warfare. It wasn't fear of the enemy or concern for his own survival. It was a deeper, more primal emotion that seemed to seize his very soul. He was afraid of what the humans represented. These weren't just warriors. They weren't even just killers. There was something else entirely, something that could look at the most feared predators in the galaxy and decide they needed to be extinct. The clinical precision of their attack, the complete absence of mercy, the way they had hunted down fleeing enemies like animals. It spoke of a mindset that was utterly alien to every other species he had encountered. "We should render assistance," Captain Mordetta said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Prepare medical teams and engineering support." "Yes, Captain," Zexthara replied automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. In all his years of warfare, he had fought for territory, for resources, for political advantage. He had killed enemies, destroyed ships, conquered worlds. But he had never committed genocide with such casual efficiency. He had never looked at an entire species and decided they simply needed to cease existing. The humans had, and they had done it to protect a world full of dead civilians they couldn't save. As the Kathrani vessel moved closer to the damaged human ship, Zexthara found himself wondering what kind of beings could love so fiercely that their hatred burned like a star. What kind of creatures could be driven to such extremes by the death of strangers? More importantly, what would happen when these humans encountered real opposition? What would they do when they met enemies who could match their technology and tactics? The universe was about to find out, and for the first time in his long military career, Commander Zexthara wasn't sure he wanted to be around to see it. The docking procedure began, and soon he would meet these humans face to face. He had faced down the worst killers the galaxy had to offer, but something told him this encounter would be different. These weren't just another warrior species joining galactic civilization. They were something new, something unprecedented, something terrifying. The docking bay of the Vengeance of Stars had been cleared of all non-essential personnel. Captain Mordetta had insisted on this precaution, though she hadn't explained her reasoning. Zexthara suspected she was as unsettled as he was by what they had witnessed. The human shuttle was small and functional, built with the same brutal efficiency as their warship. As it settled onto the landing pad, Zexthara noticed that even this simple transport vessel carried weapons. Enough firepower to disable most civilian craft. Medical teams, standing by, reported Chief Medic Velnara over the communication system. Engineering crews are ready to assist with repairs to their primary vessel. Zexthara watched as the shuttle's airlock cycled open. Captain Richardson emerged first, his tall frame moving with the careful grace of someone accustomed to zero gravity. Behind him came 4 other humans, 3 males and 1 female, all wearing the same blood-stained uniforms. What struck Zexthara immediately was how ordinary they looked. These weren't the towering warriors of Rigel Prime or the cybernetically enhanced soldiers of the Nexus Coalition. They appeared physically unremarkable, bipedal mammals with soft skin and no visible natural weapons. The tallest barely reached Zexthara's shoulder height. Their eyes held intelligence, but nothing that seemed particularly alien or threatening. Yet these same beings had just committed genocide against one of the galaxy's apex predator species. Captain Mordetta, Richardson said, approaching with hand extended in what Zexthara recognized as a human greeting gesture. "Thank you for responding to our distress call. I'm sorry we couldn't provide more advance warning about our condition." The Kathrani captain accepted the gesture, though Zexthara could see the uncertainty in her movements. "Think nothing of it, Captain Richardson. We are honored to assist. This is my security chief, Commander Zexthara." Richardson turned to study Zexthara with pale blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "Commander, I understand you have questions about what happened at New Eden." "I have studied warfare for over 300 years, Zexthara said carefully. "What I witnessed in your combat footage challenges everything I thought I understood about space combat." A ghost of a smile crossed Richardson's face. "I imagine it would. Our weapons technology developed along somewhat different lines than most galactic civilizations." "Different how?" "Kapten Mordetain Kvyet. Most species seem to focus on energy efficiency and surgical precision." One of Richardson's officers, a woman with short brown hair, interjected. "We concentrated on maximizing destructive potential and eliminating variables that could allow enemy survival." Zexthara felt that cold sensation in his chest again. "You designed your weapons specifically to prevent escape or survival." "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun." The woman introduced herself with a slight nod. "And yes, Commander. When we commit to destroying something, we prefer to be thorough." The casualness of the statement was what disturbed Zexthara most. These humans spoke of genocide the way most beings discussed maintenance schedules or supply requisitions. There was no boasting, no apparent pride in their destructive capabilities, just matter-of-fact acceptance of their own lethality. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in more comfortable surroundings," Captain Mordetta suggested. "Our medical teams are ready to assist your wounded, and our engineers can help assess damage to your vessel." "Appreciated," Richardson replied. "Though I should mention that our medical requirements might be somewhat different from standard galactic protocols." Chief Medic Velnara approached, her sensor equipment already active. "If I may scan for basic physiological data, it would help us provide appropriate treatment." Richardson nodded consent, and Velnara activated her medical scanner. Almost immediately, her expression changed from professional curiosity to alarm. "Captain," she called out, her voice tight with concern. "These readings, this is impossible." "What is it?" Captain Mordetta demanded. "According to my instruments, these beings shouldn't be alive," Velnara explained, her hands trembling as she adjusted her equipment. "Their cardiovascular systems are operating under extreme stress. Their neural activity is off the charts, and their muscle tissue shows signs of micro-tearing throughout their entire bodies." Lieutenant Commander Chen laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both pleasant and unsettling. "Combustim, Doc. We've been running on enhancement drugs for the last 72 hours. Keeps us functional when we need to push beyond normal human limits." "Enhancement drugs?" Velnara repeated weakly. "Chemical cocktails that override natural fatigue responses, increase reaction times, and suppress fear responses," Richardson explained. "Standard issue for extended combat operations. The side effects are manageable if you don't use them for more than a week or so." Zexthara's mind reeled. "You chemically alter your own biology for warfare?" "When necessary," Chen replied. "The Vexi hunting fleet wasn't going to wait for us to get a good night's sleep." "But the physiological cost," Velnara protested, "is acceptable when weighed against the alternative," Richardson finished. "Chief Medic, Velnara, was it? Your concerns are appreciated, but we understand the risks. Our physiology is more adaptable than it might appear." As if to prove his point, Richardson pulled a small injector from his belt and pressed it against his neck. The device hissed softly, and Zexthara watched the human's vital signs normalize on Velnara's scanner. "Recovery compounds," Richardson explained. "They'll help process the combat drugs and begin cellular repair. We should be functional again within 6 hours. You carry battlefield medicine that can counteract days of chemical enhancement in minutes?" Captain Mordetta asked. "Our medical technology evolved alongside our weapons development," Chen said. "No point in building soldiers who can destroy anything if they die from their own performance enhancements." The group began moving toward the command deck, but Zexthara found himself studying the humans more carefully. Now that he knew what to look for, He could see the signs of their chemical enhancement, the slight tremor in their hands, the way their eyes tracked movement with predatory intensity, the controlled precision of their movements that spoke of reflexes pushed far beyond natural limits. "Your vessel," he said to Richardson as they walked. "The way it moved during combat. That wasn't just superior technology, was it?" Richardson glanced at him with what might have been approval. "Perceptive." "No, Commander, it wasn't just technology. Our ship's control systems are designed to interface directly with enhanced human nervous systems. When we're running combat stims, we don't just pilot our ships, we become them." Neural interface technology, Captain Mordetta breathed. "The theoretical applications are extraordinary, but the risks are significant," Chun agreed. "About 30% of our pilots suffer permanent neurological damage from extended interface use. But the tactical advantages are considerable." Zextera stopped walking. The humans continued for a few steps before noticing, then turned back to face him. "You accept 30% casualty rates from your own technology?" he asked. "Only for volunteer crews," Richardson said. "We don't conscript interface pilots. Everyone who undergoes the neural modification process knows the risks. And they volunteer anyway." "Commander," Chun said quietly, "did you see the footage for New Eden? 2 million civilians, including children, processed for food by the Vex High. When our people volunteer for dangerous assignments, it's usually because they've seen what happens when we're not effective enough." The statement hung in the air like a weapon. Zextera realized that these humans had built their entire military philosophy around a simple principle. Any sacrifice was acceptable if it prevented greater suffering. They would poison their own bodies, damage their own brains, and accept horrific casualty rates because the alternative was letting others die. "Your species has only recently joined galactic civilization," Captain Mordetta observed as they resumed walking. "How did you develop such advanced military technology so quickly?" "We didn't develop it quickly," Richardson replied. "We've been at war for most of our recorded history. When we finally achieved interstellar travel, we brought several thousand years of military innovation with us." "You fought wars for thousands of years?" Zextera asked, trying to keep the horror out of his voice. "Almost continuously," Chun confirmed. "Different factions, different ideologies, different resources. Competition for survival shaped our entire technological development. Most of our civilian innovations started as military projects." They reached the command deck, where Captain Mordetta invited the humans to take seats around the central strategy table. Zextera noticed that even at rest, the humans maintained a subtle alertness, their eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. "Can you tell us more about this Vex High threat?" Captain Mordetta asked. "Our databases indicate there is significant regional power, but we've had little direct contact." "They're not just a regional power," Richardson said grimly. "They're an existential threat to every non-Vex High species in this sector. Their entire civilization is built around conquest and consumption. They don't just want territory or resources. They want to turn every other intelligent species into livestock." "Livestock," Zextera repeated. "They consider all non-Vex High life to be food sources," Chun explained. "They'll keep some individuals alive for breeding purposes, but the majority of any conquered population gets processed immediately. They're very efficient about it. And you decided this was unacceptable," Captain Mordetta observed. "Yes," Richardson said simply. "So you declared war on an entire species?" "We declared war on an entire philosophy," Chun corrected. "The Vex High could have chosen to be anything. They chose to be predators. We chose to be exterminators." The casualness of the statement sent chills through Zextera's body. These humans weren't motivated by territorial ambition or resource competition. They had looked at another species and decided it didn't deserve to exist. More disturbing was the fact that Zextera was beginning to agree with them. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Your ship is damaged, you're far from human territory, and there are other Vex High fleets in this sector." Richardson and Chun exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them, and Chin nodded slightly. Commander, Richardson said, turning back to face Zexthara directly. How much do you know about human industrial capacity? Very little, Zexthara admitted. Your species has been largely isolated until recently. The ship we arrived in, the Indomitable, was one of 1,200 identical vessels completed last month, Richardson said. We're commissioning approximately 15,000 new warships every standard year, and that rate is accelerating. The numbers hit Zexthara like physical blows. 15,000 ships per year. Our homeworld has been converting civilian industrial capacity to military production since we made first contact with galactic civilization, Chin explained. When we realized what species like the Vexhi were doing to defenseless worlds, our government decided that peaceful coexistence wasn't possible. You're building an invasion fleet, Captain Mordetta said, and it wasn't a question. We're building an extinction fleet, Richardson corrected. Every Vexhi world, every Vexhi ship, every Vexhi individual. We're going to find them all, and we're going to kill them all. That's genocide, Zexthara whispered. Yes, Chin agreed. It is. The matter-of-fact acknowledgement was somehow more terrifying than any threat or boast could have been. These humans weren't driven by passion or hatred. They had made a cold, rational decision to commit species-wide murder, and they were approaching it with the same methodical precision they applied to everything else. Other species in the galaxy won't accept this, Captain Mordetta pointed out. The Galactic Council has laws against. The Galactic Council has spent 300 years passing resolutions condemning Vexhi atrocities, Richardson interrupted. How many worlds have they saved? How many populations have they protected? The silence that followed was answer enough. Everyone knew the Galactic Council was a debate society, not a military force. They could condemn and sanction and negotiate, but they couldn't protect anyone from species like the Vexhi. So you decided to take matters into your own hands, Zexthara said. Someone had to, Chin replied. And we discovered we're very good at it. As if summoned by her words, a communication alert chimed through the bridge speakers. Navigator Yixtel activated the receiver, and Captain Richardson's voice filled the air. Captain Mordetta, this is Richardson aboard the Indomitable. We've just received a priority transmission from Human Fleet Command. A Vexhi battle group has been detected moving toward the Altair system. 300,000 civilians in that system, mixed species colony. Zexthara felt his blood freeze. Altair was only 2 days away at maximum warp. How large is this battle group? Captain Mordetta asked. 47 vessels, including 6 dreadnoughts, came Richardson's reply. Significantly larger than the force we engaged at New Eden. Your ship is damaged, Captain Mordetta pointed out. You can't possibly. Actually, ma'am, we can. The human captain's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. We're not going alone. Through the view screen, new contacts began appearing on long-range sensors. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation, dozens of them, then hundreds. Each vessel was identical to the damaged human ship, but these showed no signs of battle damage. The rest of Battle Group 7, Richardson announced. We're going to save Altair, and then we're going to follow the Vexhi back to their breeding worlds. Zexthara stared at the growing human fleet with a mixture of admiration and terror. In his 3 centuries of military service, he had never seen such focused determination or such overwhelming force projection. The humans hadn't just declared war on the Vexhi. They had declared war on the very concept of predatory species, and they had the industrial might to make their declaration stick. As he watched the human fleet form up for its next strike, Zexthara realized that the galaxy was about to change in ways no one could predict. The age of apex predators was ending. The age of human exterminators had begun. The human fleet numbered 800 vessels. Zexthara stood on the observation deck of the Vengeance of Stars, watching as ship after ship dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Each arrival was precisely timed and positioned, creating a 3-dimensional grid of destruction that stretched across several thousand kilometers of space. They move like a single organism, Navigator Yixtel observed, her voice filled with professional admiration and growing unease. The coordination required for this kind of fleet movement is beyond anything in our tactical databases, Captain Mordetta finished. She had been studying the human formation for the past hour, trying to understand their strategic thinking. Commander Zexthara, you've been analyzing their combat doctrine. What do you make of this? Zexthara continued staring at the human fleet, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. They're not planning a battle, Captain. They're planning an execution. The formation wasn't designed for traditional fleet engagement. Instead, it resembled a hunting pattern. Multiple layers of ships arranged to ensure nothing could escape once the engagement began. The humans had studied their enemy and designed their tactics specifically to prevent any Vexi vessel from fleeing to warn others. Incoming transmission from the human flagship. Reported communications, Officer Dexmore. Put it through, Captain Mordetta ordered. The main screen activated, showing Captain Richardson on the bridge of the Indomitable. Behind him, Zexthara could see other human officers working with mechanical precision, their movements enhanced by the same chemical augmentation he had witnessed earlier. Captain Mordetta, Richardson said, "We're about to begin our approach to the Altair system. I wanted to offer you the opportunity to withdraw to a safe distance." "Withdraw?" Captain Mordetta asked. "Captain Richardson, we came here to render assistance. If there's a battle ahead, there won't be a battle," Lieutenant Commander Chen interrupted, appearing beside Richardson on screen. "There will be a hunt. The Vexi won't have time to organize resistance." Zexthara stepped forward. "How can you be so certain? 47 enemy vessels, including 6 dreadnoughts. Even with 800 ships, you'll face significant opposition." Richardson's expression didn't change. "Commander, may I ask how many species you've exterminated?" The question was like a physical blow. "I what?" "Complete extinction," Chen clarified. "How many times have you made the decision to eliminate every member of a species from existence?" "Never," Zexthara replied, his voice barely audible. "Then you lack the necessary reference frame to understand our tactical planning," Richardson said matter-of-factly. "This isn't our first extermination operation." The words hung in space like a nova explosion. Zexthara felt his worldview shifting, fundamental assumptions about civilization and warfare crumbling under the weight of human revelation. "Other operations?" Captain Mordetta managed to ask. "The Harvester Collective, Epsilon Sector," Chen began counting on her fingers. "The Bloodcast of Rigel Beta. The Machine Hierarchs of the Outer Dark. The Flesh Traders of Proxima Centauri. You've been systematically eliminating species across the galaxy?" Zexthara asked, his voice rising with each word. "Only the ones that posed existential threats to civilian populations," Richardson replied calmly. "We spent considerable time studying galactic history before we began our operations. Some species choose to be predators. We choose to be exterminators. The Galactic Council has no records of these operations," Captain Mordetta protested. "The Galactic Council has no records of these species anymore," Chen corrected. "When we eliminate a threat, we eliminate all traces of it. Ships, worlds, space stations, data networks. Nothing remains to threaten anyone again." Zexthara felt something fundamental break inside his mind. For 3 centuries, he had operated under the assumption that warfare had limits, that even the most brutal conflicts were constrained by some basic recognition of shared existence. The humans had abandoned such constraints entirely. "How many?" he whispered. 17 confirmed predatory species eliminated to date," Richardson replied. "The Vexi will be number 18. "You're not warriors," Captain Mordetta said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and horror. "You're apex predators hunting other apex predators." "No, ma'am," Chen corrected. "We're gardeners removing weeds." The casual dismissal of entire species as weeds was somehow more terrifying than any threat or declaration of war. These humans didn't see their enemies as fellow beings deserving of consideration or mercy. They saw them as problems to be solved through application of overwhelming force. Movement in the Altair system, Navigation Officer Yixtel announced. The Vex-High fleet is beginning orbital bombardment. On the tactical display, Zexthara could see the Vex-High ships positioning themselves around Altair Prime, their massive weapons beginning to charge. 300,000 civilians lived on that world. Farmers, merchants, artists, children. In a few hours, they would all be dead, unless the humans stopped it. All ships. This is Admiral Chun, a new voice announced over the fleet communication channel. Zexthara realized this was a different Chun, probably a relative of the lieutenant commander. We have confirmation that the Vex-High are beginning civilian harvesting operations. Rules of engagement are now active. No enemy survives. No enemy escape. Full sterilization protocol authorized. Zexthara watched in fascination and horror as the human fleet began to move. 800 vessels accelerated in perfect synchronization, their formation shifting from a dispersed hunting pattern into a focused spear aimed at the heart of the enemy fleet. But something was wrong with their approach vector. They're not heading for the Vex-High fleet, Navigator Yixtel observed, her voice puzzled. They're moving toward the outer system. They're not going to engage the fleet directly, Zexthara realized. They're going to trap them. On screen, Richardson nodded approvingly. Very good, Commander. Direct assault would give some Vex-High ships the opportunity to escape and warn their homeworlds. Instead, we're going to surround the entire system and then collapse inward. The tactical display showed the human strategy unfolding. The 800 ships were spreading out in a vast sphere around the Altair system, positioning themselves at precise intervals that would prevent any escape vector. It was a siege on an astronomical scale, conducted with mathematical precision. How long will this take? Captain Mordetta asked. 18 minutes to achieve full encirclement, Chen replied. Then, we'll begin the compression. Zexthara watched the timer count down on his personal display. 18 minutes to position 800 vessels across several billion kilometers of space. The coordination required was staggering, but the humans accomplished it with mechanical efficiency. Encirclement complete, Admiral Chun announced over the fleet channel. All ships report ready status. Beginning Phase 2. The human vessels began to move inward, maintaining their perfect spacing as they closed on the Vex-High fleet. The enemy had finally noticed the approaching threat and was beginning to organize defensive formations, but their movements seemed sluggish compared to human precision. Why aren't the Vex-High retreating? Zexthara asked. They must realize they're outnumbered. Because they don't understand what they're facing, Richardson explained. The Vex-High have never encountered a species willing to commit this level of resources to complete extermination. They think this is a rescue operation. As if to prove his point, the Vex-High fleet began repositioning to defend their orbital bombardment platforms. They were preparing for a battle to control the planet, not realizing that the humans had no intention of allowing any of them to survive regardless of the outcome. Contact in 30 seconds, Admiral Chen announced. The first human ships to reach weapon range opened fire immediately. But instead of targeting the Vex-High vessels directly, they began launching clouds of small objects that dispersed throughout the system. What are those? Captain Mordetta asked. Quantum mines, Chen replied. They create localized space-time distortions. Nothing larger than a fighter craft can pass through the field once it's active. Zexthara watched in amazement as thousands of quantum mines spread throughout the Altair system, creating an impenetrable barrier that trapped the Vex-High fleet inside a shrinking cage of destruction. No escape, he murmured. No escape, Richardson confirmed. The real killing began 30 seconds later. The human ships opened fire with the same devastating weapons Zexthara had witnessed at New Eden, but multiplied by 800. Coherent energy beams lanced through space with surgical precision, each shot finding critical systems aboard enemy vessels. The Vex-High returned fire, their own weapons blazing in the darkness, but they were firing into a three-dimensional crossfire that offered no safe positions. More importantly, the humans were using their neural interface technology to coordinate their assault with impossible precision. Every human ship moved as if controlled by a single mind, their combined fire patterns creating overlapping fields of destruction that systematically dismantled the Vexai fleet. They're not just defeating them, Navigator Yixtel observed, her voice filled with professional awe. They're dissecting them. It was true. The human attack pattern wasn't random or opportunistic. Each Vexai vessel was being methodically disabled and destroyed according to a predetermined sequence. Weapons first, then engines, then life support, then crew quarters. The humans were ensuring that every enemy aboard every ship died, but they were doing it in a way that maximized psychological impact on the surviving Vexai. They want the enemy to know they're doomed, Zextera realized. They're making the Vexai experience the same terror they inflicted on their victims. Justice, Chin said simply. One of the massive Vexai dreadnoughts broke from the defensive formation and attempted to ram the nearest human vessel. It was an act of desperation, the final gambit of a cornered predator. The human ship didn't even attempt to evade. Instead, it activated some kind of defensive field that stopped the dreadnought's charge cold, as if the massive vessel had struck an invisible wall. Inertial negation field, Richardson explained. We found it's more efficient than traditional shields for close-quarters combat. The stopped dreadnought hung helplessly in space, while human weapons systematically carved it apart. Zextera could see escape pods launching from the dying vessel, but, as before, the humans targeted those as well, vaporizing them without hesitation. No survivors, he whispered. No survivors, Chin agreed. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it ended, the space around Altair Prime was filled with expanding clouds of debris that had once been 47 Vexai warships. Not a single enemy vessel had escaped. Not a single enemy crew member had survived. But the humans weren't finished. Deploying planetary cleansing systems, Admiral Chun announced over the fleet channel. Zextera watched in growing horror as human ships began launching larger objects toward Altair Prime. These weren't weapons, they were some kind of atmosphere processors. What are you doing? Captain Mordeta demanded. The Vexai released bioweapons during their bombardment, Richardson explained. Standard procedure is to render any contaminated world uninhabitable for their species. We're introducing engineered viruses that will break down Vexai genetic material at the molecular level. You're sterilizing an entire planet. Only of Vexai biological material, Chin clarified. Human and other galactic species genetics are unaffected. The colonists will be able to return and rebuild within a year. The casual mention of engineered bioweapons designed to target specific species sent chills through Zextera's body. These humans hadn't just built weapons to kill their enemies. They had built weapons to erase them from existence so completely that nothing remained to threaten future generations. Admiral Chun, to all fleet vessels, came the announcement. Primary objective completed. Altair system is secured. Prepare for Phase 3 operations. Phase 3, Captain Mordetta asked. We're going to follow their navigation computers back to their homeworlds, Richardson said. Every Vexai colony, every breeding world, every outpost. We're going to find them all. And then, we're going to kill them all, Chun replied. The human fleet began forming up into a new configuration, one designed for extended interstellar operations. Zextera realized they weren't planning a single campaign. They were embarking on a systematic extermination that could take years to complete. How many Vexai worlds are there? He asked. According to our intelligence, approximately 43 inhabited systems, Richardson replied. We estimate the total population at around 12 billion individuals. 12 billion, Captain Mordetta repeated weakly. 12 billion predators who will never again threaten innocent civilizations, Chin corrected. The universe will be safer once they're gone. As the human fleet prepared to depart for their next target, Zextera found himself confronting a terrible truth. Everything he had believed about the nature of warfare, about the limits of civilized behavior, about the basic recognition of life's value, all of it had been naive assumptions. The humans had moved beyond such constraints. They had become something new in the galaxy, something that looked at suffering and decided it needed to be eliminated at the source. They were willing to commit genocide to prevent genocide, to become monsters to destroy monsters. And the most terrifying part was that Zexthara was beginning to think they might be right. As the last human ship prepared to jump to hyperspace, Captain Richardson's face appeared on screen one final time. "Commander Zexthara," he said, "you've been studying us throughout this operation. What conclusions have you reached?" Zexthara met the human's pale blue eyes and spoke the truth that had been growing in his mind. "You're not just another warrior species joining galactic civilization." "No," Richardson agreed. "We're its immune system." The transmission ended, and the human fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only debris and the promise of extinction for anyone who threatened the innocent. Zexthara stood in the silence of the observation deck, staring at the empty space where 800 ships of death had been. For the first time in 3 centuries of warfare, he was grateful to be on the same side as the apex predators, because he had finally met something that hunted apex predators for sport. 6 months after the Altair incident, Zexthara received a priority transmission that changed everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. He was aboard the Vengeance of Stars, conducting routine patrol operations in the Centauri border zone, when a message arrived. The sender was identified as Admiral Sarah Chun, the same human officer he had met during the Vex-High extermination, though she had apparently been promoted since then. "Commander Zexthara," the recorded message began, "I hope this finds you well. I'm transmitting this message to inform you that the Vex-High species has been officially declared extinct as of yesterday. All 43 of their worlds have been sterilized, their fleet destroyed, and their population eliminated. The galaxy is safer today than it was 6 months ago." The message paused, and Zexthara could see something in Admiral Chen's expression. Not satisfaction, not pride, but a kind of weary relief. "However," she continued, "our intelligence networks have identified 18 additional predatory species that pose similar threats to civilian populations. We're beginning systematic elimination operations against each of them. I wanted to inform you because some of these species operate in sectors adjacent to Kathrani space." Zexthara felt his blood chill. 18 more species marked for extinction. "I'm also transmitting this message to extend an invitation," Admiral Chen said. "The human government has authorized the formation of joint task forces with selected allied species. We would like the Kathrani to consider participating in these operations." The invitation hung in the air like an unexploded weapon. Join the humans in their systematic extermination of predatory species, or risk being seen as an obstacle to their vision of galactic security. "If you're interested in discussing this further," the Admiral concluded, "please respond to these coordinates. We'll be conducting operations in the Vega system starting next week." The message ended, leaving Zexthara alone with thoughts that threatened to overwhelm his sanity. In 6 months, the humans had eliminated an entire species from existence. 12 billion individuals, erased as if they had never existed. And now, they were planning to do it 17 more times. "Commander," Captain Mordetta's voice called over the communication system, "you're needed on the bridge." Zexthara made his way to the command center, his mind still reeling from the implications of the human message. He found the captain studying a tactical display that showed multiple contacts approaching their position. "What are we looking at?" he asked. "Unknown vessels, possibly human," Navigator Yixtel reported. "They're not responding to communication attempts, but their drive signatures match the ships we encountered at Altair." "Put them on screen," Captain Mordetta ordered. The main view screen activated, revealing a sight that made Zexthara's breath catch in his throat. 3 massive vessels were approaching the Vengeance of Stars, each one larger than any ship he had ever seen. They dwarfed even the Vex-High dreadnoughts, stretching for kilometers in each direction. But it was their design that truly disturbed him. These weren't warships in any traditional sense. They were mobile factories, their hulls bristling with construction bays and manufacturing equipment. As he watched, smaller vessels were being assembled and launched from their production lines in real time. Those are human construction ships, he realized. They're building their fleet while they travel. Incoming transmission, Communications Officer Dexmore announced. "This is Admiral Chun aboard the Terra's Resolve," came a familiar voice. "Sorry to arrive unannounced, Commander Zexthara. We were in the area and thought we'd extend our invitation in person." "Admiral," Captain Mordetta replied, "your vessels are impressive." "Thank you, Captain. These are our newest generation of expedition ships. We found that traditional supply lines were insufficient for extended extermination campaigns, so we built mobile manufacturing platforms instead." The casual admission that they had redesigned their entire naval architecture around genocide sent chills through Zexthara's body. These humans didn't just plan to eliminate predatory species. They had created an industrial infrastructure capable of sustaining permanent extermination operations. "Permission to come aboard?" Admiral Chun requested. "I'd like to discuss our proposal in person." Captain Mordetta glanced at Zexthara, who nodded reluctantly. "Granted, Admiral. Docking Bay 7 is prepared to receive you." An hour later, they were gathered in the main conference room aboard the Vengeance of Stars. Admiral Chun had arrived with a small entourage of officers, all wearing uniforms that bore new insignia, symbols that looked disturbingly like stylized extinction events. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Admiral Chun began, activating a holographic display that filled the center of the room. "I wanted to brief you on the current status of our operations and discuss opportunities for Kathrani participation." The hologram showed a three-dimensional map of known space, with different colored indicators marking various star systems. Zexthara quickly realized he was looking at a target list that covered nearly a quarter of the galaxy. "Red indicators show predatory species we've already eliminated," Admiral Chun explained. "Yellow shows confirmed targets awaiting operation. Green shows species under investigation for potential threat assessment." Zexthara counted the markers and felt his sanity slip another notch. There were hundreds of yellow indicators and thousands of green ones. "You're planning to evaluate every species in the galaxy for potential elimination?" he asked. "Every species that shows predatory characteristics?" "Yes," Admiral Chun confirmed. "We've established criteria for threat assessment based on historical behavior patterns, technological development, and expansion policies." "What criteria?" Captain Mordetta asked. "Aggressive territorial expansion, systematic exploitation of other species, use of civilians as resources, elimination of other intelligent life forms." One of Chen's officers, a man with cold gray eyes, began listing. "Any species that meets 3 or more criteria gets flagged for potential elimination." "And who decides whether a species gets eliminated?" Zexthara demanded. "The Threat Assessment Council," Admiral Chun replied. "Representatives from 17 different allied species, including humans. We vote on each case based on available evidence." 17 species have agreed to participate in genocide?" Captain Mordetta asked, her voice barely audible. 17 species have agreed to participate in gardening," Admiral Chun corrected. "We're removing weeds from the garden of civilization." The same casual dismissal of entire species as weeds that Zexthara had heard before. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just military terminology, it was how humans genuinely viewed the universe. Some species were worthy of existence, others were problems to be solved. "What happens to species that refuse to participate?" he asked. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind her eyes. "Nothing, as long as they don't interfere with our operations." "And if they do interfere?" "Then they get reclassified as potential threats and subjected to the same assessment process as any other species." The threat was delivered with such casual politeness that it took Zexthara several seconds to process its implications. The humans weren't just inviting the Kathrani to join their extermination campaigns. They were offering a choice between collaboration and potential elimination. "How many species have refused your invitation?" Captain Mordetta asked. 47 so far," another human officer replied. 12 of those have been reclassified as threats following interference incidents. Interference incidents? Attempts to warn target species, providing assistance to predatory civilizations, diplomatic protests to the Galactic Council, Admiral Chen explained. Any action that impedes our ability to eliminate confirmed threats. Zextara realized he was watching the birth of a new kind of empire, one built not on conquest or resource extraction, but on systematic elimination of anything deemed undesirable. The humans had appointed themselves as judges, juries, and executioners for the entire galaxy. I need to see one of your operations, he said suddenly. Before the Kathrani government makes any decision, I need to witness your methods firsthand. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. I was hoping you'd say that. We're beginning elimination operations against the Kreth Dominion next week. 3 worlds, approximately 800 million individuals. They've been systematically enslaving and consuming other species for the past 2 centuries. The Kreth, Kapten Mordeta Gospid. They're a major galactic power. They have defense treaties with dozens of species. Defense treaties, Admiral Chen corrected. Most of their allies withdrew support once we presented evidence of Kreth atrocities to the Threat Assessment Council. The few remaining supporters have been warned that interference will result in reclassification. You're going to exterminate 800 million beings, Zextara said, still struggling to process the scope of human operations. We're going to save trillions of future victims, Admiral Chen replied. The Kreth have been expanding aggressively for 3 centuries. Left unchecked, they would eventually enslave or consume every species within 50 light-years of their territory. How can you be certain? Because we've studied their historical patterns, the gray-eyed officer interjected. Kreth expansion follows predictable cycles: conquest, enslavement, resource extraction, population consumption, expansion to new territory. They've repeated this cycle 43 times in recorded history. So you've decided they can't be allowed to repeat it a 44th time? Zextara concluded. Exactly, Admiral Chen agreed. Some species choose to be predators. We choose to be their predators. The meeting continued for another hour, with the humans presenting detailed intelligence on the Kreth Dominion's crimes against other species. The evidence was overwhelming: systematic enslavement, mass consumption of civilian populations, deliberate extinction of several smaller species. By any reasonable standard, the Kreth deserved punishment. But punishment and extermination were different concepts, and Zextara found himself struggling with the moral implications of what he was witnessing. After the humans departed, he remained in the conference room, staring at the star map they had left behind. Hundreds of species marked for potential elimination, thousands more under investigation. The humans had created an industrial infrastructure capable of sustaining genocide on an astronomical scale. What are you thinking? Captain Mordeta asked quietly. I'm thinking about Vexi hunting fleets, Zextara replied. About Kreth slave ships. About all the species I've encountered that prey on the defenseless. And I'm thinking that maybe the humans are right. The admission felt like blasphemy, but Zextara couldn't deny the logic of human methods. For centuries, the Galactic Council had debated and negotiated while predatory species continued their atrocities. The humans had solved the problem by eliminating it at its source. They're asking us to become complicit in genocide, Captain Mordeta pointed out. They're asking us to become complicit in justice, Zextara countered. Every Vexi they killed was one less predator threatening innocent worlds. Every Kreth they eliminate will be one less slaver consuming civilian populations. Where does it end? Maybe it doesn't, Zextara said quietly. Maybe the universe needs permanent guardians willing to do what the rest of us can't. He stood up and walked to the view screen, staring out at the stars where human construction ships were building more instruments of extinction. I'm going to witness their operation against the Kreth, he announced. I need to see exactly what we're being asked to join. And if you're horrified by what you see, then I'll recommend the Kathrani refuse their invitation and hope we're never classified as a threat. And if you're not horrified, Zextara continued staring at the stars, thinking about 800 million Kreth slavers and trillions of potential future victims. Then, I'll recommend we join them in making the universe safe for civilization. As the vengeance of stars prepared to depart for human space, Zextara found himself confronting a fundamental question that would determine not just his own future, but the future of every species in the galaxy. Were the humans saviors or monsters? Gardeners or genocidal maniacs? The immune system of civilization or a cancer that would eventually consume everything it touched? In 1 week, he would have his answer, and the galaxy would never be the same. The transformation of a battle-hardened warrior into something else entirely was complete. Zextara was no longer just a soldier following orders or a strategist analyzing threats. He had become something new, a being forced to choose between the familiar horrors he had always known and the strange salvation offered by humanity. The choice would echo across the stars for generations to come.